Welcome to the webinar on misinformation and fake news during emergencies and how to mitigate their impact. I am Eduardo Plano, a member of the technical team of the project Strengthening Local and Community Capacities in the Face of Natural Disasters in Small Island States, which we have also called in Creole, Ranfo Karai. I have expertise in hydrology, climate change, disaster risk management, and I will be pleased to accompany you during this activity. Before we get into the subject, I want to mention that we have a button enabled for you to leave your comments and questions, and to let you know that all questions received will be answered via email, accompanied by supplementary material that may be useful for better understanding the issues. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by two colleagues, Mrs. Cristina San Roman, a member of the project team, and Mrs. Chinil Fowle from the Exata Risk Management Office of St. Lucia, who will share their experiences on the topic of fake news. And before giving the floor to Cristina, I would like to make a historical comment, a curiosity, because many of us might think, I was among them, that fake news was a phenomenon of modernity, influenced by the level of informatization in society. However, the first fake news recognized in contemporary history was published by the New York newspaper, The Suns, in 1835, at a time when there was a depression in the United States regarding the sale of printed press. It was information about beings that inhabited the moon. I do not know exactly what other type of threat the information could have posed, which sparked a state of concern throughout the United States. And the connection to what we experience today is that this occurred at a time when the capacity of printing presses to produce printed newspapers had improved and had been replaced. Animal locomotion was replaced by motorized transport, in this case by trains and ships. This allowed the news to spread widely, which is not current news but is recognized as the first fake news. In daily life, there is also a lot of fake news. Malicious gossip is also fake news. So it is something that has accompanied us for a long time. However, as is logical, the development of technology in the current information and communication era is accessible to everyone. Today, children are seemingly born with a conditioned reflex to interact with mobile phones, as if they had acquired information during their gestation, and this has allowed for a significant increase in the so-called calls that unfortunately cause harm. Extraordinary. They are practically a pandemic that affects and supersedes traditional media due to the speed at which news is disseminated through social networks like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and X, which simply reach people quickly and significantly, going viral, as it is often said. And it happens that this also coincides with a personal opinion. We live in a world where people hardly watch news broadcasts, barely read the press, and mostly just read headlines. And this also creates an environment that facilitates the negative effect of follow-up. Therefore, we find ourselves in a context where people are not only informed through digital channels, but are also an integral part of this process. In other words, they are active individuals, active people in the creation of news, and it clearly has a very negative effect when done with the intention of creating panic. The mission and one of the objectives of this webinar is precisely to discuss this phenomenon and how to counteract it, so that we can integrate the management of fake news into risk management strategies. Then, about SA. For this, we are pleased to have Mrs. Cristina San Roman with us. Cristina is a communicator and a trained methodologist with a specialization in disaster risk management. She has over 15 years of experience as a consultant for different institutions and non-governmental organizations in project management, interinstitutional relations, and communication. For example, he has worked with FLACSO, which is the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Bank, the Spanish Corporation Sciences, among many others that enrich his expertise in these topics. She also combines her work as a consultant with teaching, giving classes at the School of Collective Organization Sciences at the University of Costa Rica. So we warmly welcome Cristina, Professor Cristina. Please go ahead.
Hello, Eduardo. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and for the invitation today. I find Eduardo's framing of fake news to be very good, as it is not something new, but in this era of post-truth, where the digital component causes news to go viral so quickly, it generates much greater difficulty, especially for those of us dedicated to protection and response in emergency situations. From different sectors of society, I would like to start my presentation by understanding what these fake news stories are in more depth and above all, why they go viral so quickly in these moments of emergency. We are going to start here and understand that fake news is always misleading information that is fabricated but presented as true news. They even use the same language, whether it is the graphic language or the tone of a news story that we see or that we are traditionally accustomed to seeing in mass media, such as television, radio, or print. They are created with the purpose of disinforming and manipulating public opinion. On some occasions, it is used to generate fear or confusion, and also, specific pages or spaces are created in the digital environment for people to visit more regularly by attracting attention with these fake news stories, resulting in economic gains. In other areas, we have also seen how these fake news stories affect, for example, political and social decisions. In the recent elections in different countries in the region, we have seen how these fake profiles created with viral fake news also distort the opinion of the population. These fake news stories have their key spaces, those places where it is known that they can be quickly distributed. Obviously, we have the social networks Instagram, Facebook, and the social network X, formerly known as Twitter. We have emerging social media networks, including those aimed at younger audiences like TikTok and Snapchat, which are, as we say, breeding grounds or key factors for the viral spread of this false information. Instant messaging services are also a very important channel where this information goes viral, such as WhatsApp, the social network Telegram, and mass media. Many times, communicators working in these media outlets, faced with the need to have the scoop on certain information, disseminate news that may not have been verified with the authorities of the country, and from there, a false news story is generated. As I mentioned, there are also blogs or websites that have been created specifically to generate more traffic through fake news and thereby make a profit. In any case, in any of these spaces where information is shared, there is a common denominator. The people who use these spaces rarely verify the information, which leads to a greater problem. There are 7 reasons. There are factors that have been identified which allow these fake news stories to go viral very easily in the digital environment, and it is important for us to know them in order to be clearer or to have tools to identify these news stories. The first relates to the fact that the internet has a development where algorithmic design prevails. What does this mean? The network will always prioritize showing people the content that generates the most interaction. Logically, a fake news story is created from emotionality, from grabbing attention at first glance with a first word, with a first image. Thus, the very algorithmic design of the internet will prioritize that content and will cause it to appear more frequently online. We also have the issue of the speed of information. At this moment, no matter how much we as authorities or even the media or civil society actors want to quickly refute a piece of information, the speed of fake news will always surpass those efforts. That does not mean we will not act quickly, but we must understand that we are a step behind that moment. This is precisely because of the logic in which fake news will always go viral. More quickly. We also have the situation that we deal with people's biases. All of us have some beliefs that, whether true or not, are part of our imagination, and we naturally tend to share information regularly that is closer to our beliefs. And that is why we often see how the distribution of these fake news grows very quickly within our close circles. Emotionality is a topic that also affects fake news. The people who create it from the very beginning try to ensure that, from the first reading, it generates strong emotions, instills fear, and perhaps evokes indignation. If we want to position ourselves in society, inserting an opinion that is opposed to another group in society, then we try to make the news generate outrage, generate surprise. And what does this achieve? That people have a greater impulse to share this news more quickly in their daily lives and with others. Unfortunately, these news items are always shared regularly without verification. The fifth aspect of why this news goes viral so quickly is the lack of digital literacy. We are in this digital era that has accelerated in the last 8 years, and the tools and knowledge to identify these reliable sources are not keeping pace with the development of social media and other applications and tools that help to viralize these fake news. Therefore, the work on this digital literacy is key. This webinar is precisely part of this digital literacy work, but that it must be taken with greater responsibility, and authorities, the media, and civil society must work in this direction. Another aspect that also affects the situation relates to information from anonymous sources and bots specifically created to viralize these fake news. In many cases, during times of crisis, there are profiles that operate automatically, respond automatically, and serve to generate an opinion among the population that is actually increasing. These fake news, because there are many fake profiles that operate automatically, which are instilling these ideas. And the last aspect I wanted to share has to do with closed ecosystems. What are these closed ecosystems about? Many of you may have noticed that on your social media, you regularly find opinions from other people who are part of your social network that are very similar to your own opinions. Well, this is because social media regularly shares content with you that aligns with your interests and beliefs. They are designed that way. So, when there is a fake news story and we have several people or groups around us already sharing that information, it is very likely that I will also receive that information because it aligns with my interests and beliefs that regularly appear in the communication of my social networks. Fake news has the condition of being able to go viral so quickly and is created from different types. There are different ways to create fake news. One relates to deliberate misinformation. What does this mean? These are news stories that are completely invented from their conception and are intended to deceive people from the outset. We also have another type of news that is sensationalist, meaning it starts from a reality but is exaggerated and distorted. To capture people's attention, as we see in some news reports covering, for example, an emergency situation or a disaster in our communities, they take the information further, and probably what this does is cause greater panic and concern among the population, which of course affects us in our efforts to attend to and respond to those communities. There are also occasions when decontextualization occurs. What does this mean? It is taking a real fact, but I remove it from its context and distort its meaning. This is very common. We see it, for example, in situations where there is a flood, an example in a community, and I take images or videos of another situation that happened in the past in that same community, is used to generate new information. But this is taken out of context. It is not even the same moment or the same image that is occurring in the present. And on other occasions, we sometimes have some communications that are generated as satire or as parody. And these can also be confused with real news, because the understanding that this communication is not real, but rather a communication to attract attention or critique a topic, is not read the same way by all people in the population. Therefore, confusion can arise now. Indeed, whatever type of fake news we are facing, we must understand that most fake news always has an agenda or intention behind it. They are usually not unintentional errors, but rather planned to fulfill a role of information distortion at the moment they are made. And in emergencies, it is even a little more complex, because these fake news stories in emergency situations create three major problems that we have identified. The first aspect relates to polarizing society, putting society at odds, and this often generates a second aspect, which is the loss of trust in institutions. These fake news stories regularly do the job or complicate work of the country's institutions and the response personnel, because there is a lot of misinformation that can lead us to think that the institutions are not working effectively or efficiently in response to the emergency. Finally, they also create unnecessary panic, and this unnecessary panic is complex because we, in moments of emergency, require the population to be focused in the actions they need to take to safeguard their lives and follow the guidelines the authorities are providing. But if there is unnecessary panic, if the population at that moment, due to the viral spread of fake news, is making wrong decisions, then the work becomes even more complicated. I want to share some examples that indeed help us better ground this theory I have presented to understand fake news. The first example I want to present is related to Hurricane Irma in 2017. This hurricane, as you may remember, impacted the coast of Florida. At that time, many false weather forecasts circulated, and these forecasts were shared more than 36,000 times. This was recently reported by the local authorities and caused a lot of problems. Why were these false weather forecasts brought into existence? Well, it was precisely groups of people who wanted to generate money and profit by creating these fake pages in order to. I mentioned earlier that sometimes, indeed, online platforms generate income based on the number of visits they receive from people. They found an emergency situation as an opportunity to generate these false weather forecasts and monetize their pages, which of course resulted in a great deal of misinformation. And the population at that time found itself misinformed and making inaccurate decisions. Another example that occurred at that same time is Facebook users who encouraged citizens to confront the hurricane using their weapons. This happened, and just more than 27,000 people responded that they would participate or that they would be armed at the time of the hurricane response if necessary. The country's authorities had to, through the social network Twitter, now known as Red X, refute this information and request the population to keep their weapons stored in these places during the hurricane period. Another thing that happened was videos. For example, showing bus overturns that were indeed broadcast and went viral millions of times. Yet they were videos linked to a cyclone in India that had occurred years earlier. Of course, people did not share the information without verifying that all these videos, they had developed at another time. And here is an example of how authorities, due to an error or some lack of knowledge at the moment of sharing information, can also generate fake news. This example we see here is a communication that was made on the Twitter network, now known as Red X, from the White House, where an image or video is published about the Miami International Airport completely flooded during Hurricane Irma. And just minutes later, it is the airport itself that communicates a posting, real photographs from the moment where it says this video is being uploaded, right now from the networks of the White House. It is not real because Miami International Airport was not flooded at that time. So, see how dangerous it is even when an authority mistakenly communicates information that goes viral very quickly and is inaccurate. At that moment, also during Hurricane Irma, various media outlets were also working on to inform people about which false videos related to Hurricane Irma were going viral and to debunk some information. This was very important and is a work done with the authorities to create these spaces for the dissemination of the truth. A second example that I bring you here in this presentation relates to all the conspiracy theories of fake news during the coronavirus pandemic. Even the World Health Organization refers to the term infodemic to describe the practice of spreading false news or incorrect information during the time of the pandemic. Here, you remember, we find a series of myths from home remedies to cure coronavirus to incorrect information regarding vaccines. Well, there was a strong effort from the World Health Organization, and not only the World Health Organization, but also different authorities and media in the countries to be able to debunk all this fake news and misinformation that was being rapidly and widely spread through unverified social media. Even in the case of Costa Rica, it happened that a group of citizens, which ended up being more than 20,000 people, called themselves the common people, and these individuals launched a strong campaign that had an impact to the entire country, indicating that the pandemic was not real and that the vaccines were being administered at that moment to control the people of the country. So, see how fake news can completely affect a country's perception regarding such important issues as, in this case, the pandemic. And the last example I want to share before closing, this first part of my presentation relates to the floods that occurred in the past in Brazil, in the area of Rio Grande do Sul. At this moment, emergency protections were activated and the response personnel attended to the community efficiently. However, unfortunately, due to the problematic issue of politicizing the moment of the emergency, a group of the population opportunistically took advantage of it to generate false news, telling the victims not to leave their homes because if they did, they would not be able to return, as the government was planning to take over the houses and land for other purposes. This caused a lot of problems for the response and care personnel, and thanks to a joint effort between the government and the media, they were able to refute this information. Well, this is the first part of my presentation where I wanted to frame the topic of fake news, and for now, I will hand the floor back to Eduardo.
Thank you, Christina. Very interesting. It has established fundamental concepts and has not put this topic I mentioned in the context of a pandemic, but you have narrowed it down by talking about infodemia, a much more appropriate concept since it refers to an epidemic of information. It is truly regrettable, very regrettable, because it is somewhat like that old saying that a lie repeated many times becomes the truth. With the capacity of information technology to multiply even artificially false news, it becomes much more dangerous, especially when it comes to disasters where the safety of a country and the lives of people are at stake. So it is now about how to face and counteract the negative effects of this infodemia that we currently live with and that is increasing. And for this, I will have the pleasure of presenting an interview that was recently conducted with Mrs. Chinel Paul from NEMO, the National Emergency Management Organization in St. Lucia, where she discusses, from her experience as a national specialist, the topic of how to tackle fake news. Let's watch the interview. Thank you very much for allowing us to conduct this interview, and we would like to ask you some questions to delve into topics that are surely of interest to the people who are listening to us. First of all, we would like to know what impact fake news has on the community of St. Lucia during emergencies.
What impact does fake news have on the St. Lucia communities during emergencies is one. Fake news causes our population to lose trust in the authorities, where it pertains to messages and information. It also endangers the lives of civilians, and if the manipulated information is adhered to. It also causes panic and confusion. Misinformation leads to widespread panic, causing people to make hasty decisions that might put them in danger. It also gives distrust in authorities. When false information is spread, it can undermine, trust in official sources like the government and the emergency services, making it harder for them to effectively communicate important and safety information. Fake news also is resource misallocations, where communities may divert resources based on inaccurate reports, which can strain emergency services and their, hinder their ability to respond effectively. Fake news can also cause public health risk. In health-related emergencies, misinformation about mistreatment or prevention can lead to unsafe practices, further endangering the community. Addressing these issues through education and promoting media literacy can help mitigate the impact of fake news during crisis. Thank you.
Could you comment on some examples of your experience at NEMO?
Of course, I can. Sure. At NEMO, examples are sometimes before the all clear is given during a disaster, persons go out taking on the roles of our district disaster committees. Example, they take pictures, they broadcast pictures, they take weather broadcasts from other islands, and they put it on St. Lucia letterhead, which also makes the information very false. We have committees in St. Lucia called the district disaster committees, where each community has a committee in place who go out during a disaster and do something we called um just now 1 second. They go out in the communities, they take pictures, and they do reports, damage assessment reports. Yes, thank you.
When they identify the circulation of fake news, what measures do they take to minimize or counteract it? Do you have any specific protocols?
Yes. Nemo St. Lucia uses social media. We use social media platforms such as radio stations, local television stations to debunk the fake news, and advice is given to the public to rely only on information from NEMO official pages and the St. Lucia Met office. When identifying circulation of fake news, the following actions sometimes we take to counteract them, such as fact-checking, where we verify information using credible sources and fact-checking organizations to establish the truth. Information comes from the community where we share accurate information through social media, bulletins, local news, like I said earlier. Engaging with authorities where we collaborate with the local government and emergency services to ensure they are aware of the misinformation and can address it effectively. Also promoting media literacy, which organize workshops, discussions, to recognize credible sources and critical thinking. We also encourage responsible sharing, where we urge community members to think critically before sharing information, emphasizing the importance of fact-checkings, monitoring trends, utilizing social media tools, and also creating support networks, which foster community networks to facilitate open communication, which allows individuals to verify information collectively. Taking these actions can help build resilience against fake news and ensure the community remains informed and safe during emergencies. Thank you.
Can you share your experience working with the media in the country? For example, do you have the support of the media, radio, television, and the press to refute false information?
Yes, having the support of various media outlets such as radio, TV, and press can be crucial in refuting false information. In St. Lucia, here's how we play the role. Rapid dissemination of accurate information through media outlets can quickly share verified facts to counter misinformation, reaching a wide audience. Also, we rely on expert analysis, where journalists can provide expert opinions and analysis helping the community understand the situation better and identify credible sources. We also have collaborative fact-checking, where partnering with fact-checking organizations allow media to publish corrections and clarify on the false information. Highlighting at NEMO, we highlight official statements, amplifying messages from authorities like the Met Office and public health officials who reinforces and trust, where we provide clear and accurate information. Collaboration with the media can significantly enhance efforts to combat misinformation in St. Lucia and support the community resilience during emergencies. Yes, we provide free access, and given that NEMO official pages and the Met Office pages is reliable sources, we use it to refute false information. Thank you.
And one last question. Based on your experience that you have shared with us today, could you recap what the most important recommendations are that you would like to share with the people attending this webinar for managing fake news?
Yes. Handling fake news, I would say to only rely on official sources, encourage responsible sharing, and utilize social media tools where this is our way forward. I would say create the networks in your communities and rely solely on the facts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janil, for your collaboration.
The criteria presented by Janil in his interview are very interesting. It is her local perspective as a person who is specifically involved in this in St. Lucia. I want to highlight something general from your intervention, which is an effective way to counteract fake news by creating trust in the responsible institutions. This means that I am talking about a system. That is, disaster risk management is a system that involves everyone from the family to the highest levels of the state. And you really have to have trust. She gave examples of how workshops, special schools, direct interaction with social networks and communities are developed. And the network's point of view is effectively about creating trust so that people know whom they should turn to in this situation. Now, to discuss this topic in a bit more detail, I will hand it over to my colleague Christina, who will address how to counteract the negative effects of faith. Go ahead, Christina.
Thank you, Eduardo. Zenil's intervention was very good. The interview, precisely much of the information we will see in this second part. She has mentioned it. And I agree with Eduardo that building trust from the authorities is key for the community to follow the correct information and not be misled by this issue of fake news. Working to debunk these false news stories is a painstaking task, isn't it? Every day there are different actors involved in achieving this, and this is part of what I would like to start with in this second part of the presentation. There are different actors that interact with false news. On one hand, we have the community, which regularly shares these false news without verifying them. On the other hand, we have the authorities, who are the ones that need to respond effectively and quickly to these news items. On the other hand, we have another important piece, which is the media, who can support us. At times, they have often acted as detractors by sharing news and sometimes information. But in most cases, if we have authorities working closely together, they can even serve as a spokesperson to debunk these false news. At this moment, I would like to share some important tips or effective tools for each of these three groups to work on demystifying these false news stories. Let's look at the first group that relates to the community, all the people and what we can do from the management of our social media. The first aspect relates to trusting the sources we recognize and being aware of fake accounts. Many times, often in the media of our country, we hear of different accounts of different false resources that have gone viral and are clarified precisely in these mass media. Well, if we already know that those are fake accounts, they are accounts that we shouldn't follow, and we should only trust those other ones that are reliable sources. Another important aspect relates to investigating the information that comes to us. For example, if we receive a piece of news and see that it comes from an account with very little information, where the information is not accurate or consistent, it is likely that it comes from a false news source. Spelling mistakes are very common in these spaces where false news circulates. For example, misspelled words with grammatical errors within a section in an article on a page. That is probably fake news, because it is news that is generated very quickly to go viral before being debunked. Therefore, we can regularly find some errors of this kind, and this should make us doubt the veracity of these news stories. Another aspect that is important for us to consider is that there are accounts that pretend to be sources of reliable news, which have names very similar to other sources that are institutional sources in our countries. So if we already know the official sources and see that there is information coming from a page with a name very similar to that of the official source, but with some variation, we should doubt those portals, because they may not be the portal, and it is very likely that it is not the official portal of the authority. Let us then try to follow the official government accounts, and regularly these official accounts on social media have the opportunity to have a verifiable icon, whether on Facebook, Instagram, or other networks that allow for this verifiable icon. Therefore, we can check if it is an official page. As members of the community, it is also our responsibility to verify the journalists and organizations that are providing us with information. A very simple way to do this is, if we receive information from a journalist whose work we are not familiar with, we can look for more information about that journalist on social media and the internet. If we find no information or very little information about that journalist, it could be a fake profile that is transmitting information to us. Searching and delving into the information about the author of the article, as I mentioned, is very important to investigate their credentials to see if this information is real or not. And something important, avoid sharing information that we have doubts about. When something seems exaggerated, or if we have doubts about the information, let's try not to share it. A simple way to help prevent these false news stories from going viral is simply by waiting. Wait. Do not share the information at that moment. And sometimes by waiting 1 or 2 days, we will see that. In the rest of the media, there will be supplementary information that will allow us to determine whether that news is false. False or not false. So, in case of doubt, let's wait and see how the facts actually unfold. And if it is information that can be shared, then we will share it. But if not, we will have avoided spreading false news. For the authorities, I also have some recommendations that were well shared by Senil. Just in their interview, one aspect relates to being transparent in their communications. Authorities must share as much information as possible, as Shanil mentioned, through bulletins, their social media, and by maintaining an updated website at all times. Above all, they need to be very quick in their responses because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, false news always goes viral faster than institutions can respond to it. And that is a reality we have to deal with. Therefore, we need to try to be efficient and respond as quickly as possible in order to mitigate the impact of this false news. Using official spokespersons to convey accurate information is key. People in communities, when they regularly see a recognizable face, it generates trust. And it is easier to refute false news when I can use these spokespersons to deny this information. It is very important to communicate the information we want to share with the public through different channels and in real time using multiple why to reach diverse audiences so that we can correct more quickly and effectively. As we know, there are different social media platforms that are used by people of various ages. When we are talking about older adults, it is easier to use channels like Facebook than to use other channels like Instagram. They are also used by adults, but young people also use them, or for example, more emerging channels, like we are talking about TikTok, we are talking about Twitch, which reach younger populations, even reaching populations like children. And all these different channels must be utilized. This will allow us to neutralize misinformation more quickly. And here I also wanted to mention the topic of how influencers or so-called influenciadores can sometimes share information that is also false in a misleading way is relevant in this era. So we can indeed also use these influencers to our advantage by asking them to share correct information that can prevent the further spread of these false news. Creating strategic alliances with media outlets is essential for media authorities, even if some outlets are perhaps more sensationalist. We need to have a crucial and beneficial alliance with them. As long as we have them close by and not during the emergency, before the emergency, they will serve as support in the moments when we need to refute information. For example, there are media outlets, and I will show you an example shortly, that have fact-checking tools that allow us to combat this misinformation. Here is an example. In the case of Costa Rica, the media outlet La Nación has created a platform called No Coma Cuento, which is what this platform allows us to do, is to place false news and debunk this false news. It is a very useful platform that we must identify if there are already platforms of this kind operating in our countries and work alongside these media outlets as well. Another recommendation for the authorities relates to the creation of a database of key journalists, as well as training them in disaster risk management, as mentioned by Shanil in her interview. How can we approach them, provide them with information so that when these journalists cover the news, they do so in a more accurate way. Working in a coordinated manner with communication professionals from different institutions in the country is important. For example, in the case of Costa Rica, we have a chat for communicators from different institutions in the country where valuable information is shared so that they can disseminate it across all their social media and allow us to clarify possible false news that is potentially currently being shared on social media. Positioning reliable sources among the population is also important. For example, as I mentioned at the beginning, the official page of the authorities must always be active and the institution's social media must always be updated. Ultimately, promoting media literacy among the population is key. Working with educational campaigns to teach people how to verify sources and use fact-checking tools as soon as they are available is very important. And of course, increasingly position our channels, whether our social media or our official page, among the people in our community. Mapping community interest groups is also important. When there is false news, if we already have, for example, the contacts of our local emergency committees, it is easier to disseminate information through these local emergency committees because they will transmit it to their entire community more quickly. Monitoring social media conversations constantly is also very important. Many times a rumor or false news can be mitigated more quickly than if it has been circulating on social media for several days and we were unable to identify or did not realize that this information was being shared. As I mentioned earlier, digital channels must always be active and should always have people responding to inquiries from community members who are reaching out to us during an emergency or disaster. Finally, I wanted to share a few more tips for media that can be extremely valuable, just as I mentioned to you. Both the media and authorities, as well as civil society, we are all involved in this issue of fighting against fake news. Therefore, for the media, promoting the practice of thorough information verification is very important. And how do we achieve this verification? Having direct communication with the authorities in real time during emergencies is essential. They should be our primary channel of information. Even as mentioned in Chanel's interview, the ability to access technical professionals from the authorities who can share information with us and for us to digest that information and convey it clearly to the community is very important. Avoid speculation. Let us refrain from spreading information that has not been confirmed. The additional information we receive from the relevant authorities must be to communicate to the community in a clear and precise manner with the responsibility of simplifying and clarifying the information without losing its technical veracity. Why? So that the public can more easily understand what they need to do. Differentiating between facts and opinions is very important. It is necessary to separate objective information from interpretations or analyses that at least at the beginning or at the moment of an emergency, as it may not be the right time for it to take place. It is very important to allow space for the correction of false information. On many occasions, due to errors or because the information is still developing, media outlets provide information that is inaccurate or false. Therefore, when the media provides false information and realizes that they have disseminated incorrect information, it is important for them to correct this information as soon as possible and hopefully give space to the authorities so that they can also provide the correct information. Always collaborate with the social media platforms at your disposal, using these platforms to debunk rumors and provide reliable data. The social media of the media outlets are very active and can indeed be a great ally in debunking these rumors and supporting the authorities in this regard. We can also educate the audience by providing guidelines on how to identify these fake news, as we saw in the example from the media outlet La Nación in Costa Rica. And well, to wrap up this second part of the presentation, I wanted to mention that this phenomenon of fake news is here to stay and has been for a long time. As Eduardo mentioned, it's not something new. It's just that in this digital age, it is more complicated to contain these fake news. And it is our responsibility to prepare ourselves to face this news not only today, but in the future. I hope this information has been and will be valuable to you, and I now return the floor to Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Christina, for your excellent presentation, which truly contains a set of advice and recommendations on how to face this issue that affects us, and as you rightly say, will stay with us for a long time, unfortunately. I would like, if you allow me, to highlight 3 aspects from the 3 presentations that I believe are fundamental and that have been mentioned, which does not mean that they are more important than everything that has been said. First of all, the need to create trust. It should be seen as a functioning system, as I mentioned earlier, from the family to the highest levels of state governments. We must work with a certain level of confidence as a way to counteract this problem we are facing. This is fundamental. Another topic that Christina mentioned, which I believe is important, is that people need to know that this exists and that they cannot crawl and be replicators of this problem. One must verify before assuming a news item is true, by any means necessary. Of course, if we have trust established in the system, this problem becomes easier because then people will not pay attention to anything other than what the established media say about it. If we have experience in the same project, we saw it in the Dominican Republic, how there are social networks, local networks, that identify a leader and people follow them because the system works. And one last thing I want to say. Christina mentioned it, but I want to reinforce it. The age problem is that children and young people are the ones who make the most use of this type of technology and therefore are the most vulnerable to this issue. This is where the responsibility of families and schools comes in on how to guide them properly. Thank you. The number of young people and children who consume hours and hours of the internet, and therefore this is also a fundamental role that we need to develop to address fake news. Thus, this webinar has covered this very important topic. We want to thank all the people who have been with us, who have accompanied us in this webinar. I would like to tell you that this webinar is part of UNESCO's Educational Capacity Development Platform. In the coming days, you will be receiving an attendance certificate via email, and you will also receive information about our upcoming webinar. And I will not say goodbye without reminding you that we have a button where you can make inquiries. If you have any questions about this morning's topic that we shared, or if you would like any additional information, please let me know. Thank you very much. Until next time.